My name is Jessica Zambri, and I am a senior facilitator here with Studio B. Today, we are honored and humbled to have Dr. Nathalie Edmond as a guest on our program today. Dr. Nathalie Edmond is a licensed clinical psychologist and experienced yoga teacher who takes an integrative perspective to her consultations and trainings. She believes that transformation happens when we integrate mind, body, and spirit and have an embodied dialogue. She's trained in multiculturalism and intersectional feminism and takes a trauma-informed approach to her work. She believes that anti-racism work includes addressing all marginalized groups and identities working towards liberation of all beings. She's influenced by Black Buddhist teachers, Black feminist ideology, Black liberation theology, anti-racism leaders and ancestors, and everyone she has ever come into contact with. She regularly leads anti-racism and diversity trainings for clinical practices, libraries, school districts, corporations, nonprofits, activism groups, and yoga communities. We are really grateful to have Nathalie here with us today with a focus on a topic of metta and loving kindness. And Nathalie, thank you for being here with us today. And I also want to name that I'm stepping in for our CEO, Jennifer Ciamboli, today, as she is very apologetic that she can't be with us. Something has happened and she's just going to take care of that. And she's okay, so I want to name that too. Nathalie, is there anything that you'd like to add at this time or share before we begin into some questions?
No, I'm just really excited to talk to you about this very important topic that's really close to my heart.
Thank you. Well, I think we might begin, if it's okay, with just defining, like, what does metta or loving kindness mean to you?
Yeah, it's interesting because often when I think of metta, I think of loving kindness. And so I can already hear the Sanskrit words in my mind of like loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. But yet that is loving kindness. And yet when I think of metta, I think of the practice of friendliness, of goodwill towards others. And so when I think about like the radical definition for me, and I say radical purposely, the radical definition to me of metta is wishing all beings without exception freedom from inner and outer harm, health, happiness, a life with ease. And it's radical because there are some people it's harder for me to wish well. Yet how do I cultivate that in my daily life?
Yeah, appreciating that description and that emphasis on radical. How do you, what is the how in that?
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I think that's like those micro moments day in and day out. Like if I think about how did it begin for me, I don't even know if I could really name how it began. But if I think about what were little practices that I would do, and I think it's like when I used to commute more and I used to experience the aggression of other drivers, or what I would label the inconsideration of other drivers, it started with that practice of wishing them well, as they speeded along to their next destination. And so how, for me, how did it become I really love mantras and chanting as a way to unplug from the chatter of my mind. And so when I used to do the chanting of loka samasta sukhino bhavantu, just doing it in a different language, for me helps me get out of my head and out of whatever stories I'm telling myself about this other individual or this situation or this dynamic, that helps me drop in at this point. And before I started saying it in Sanskrit, I used to say it in English, right? I used to say it, may all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. And then after a while, as I got more into the deep teachings of yoga, that's when I started to use the Sanskrit. I felt something vibrationally was different when I said it in Sanskrit. And so I think however people can find the words to, or the energy, or sometimes I think of it as turning towards, right? Sometimes, I'm so angry, or I'm so upset, or I feel so harmed by someone or the situation that it's hard for me to fully drop in to that. But can I turn towards? Can I feel a little bit of softening in my body? Sometimes it's a body thing, right? Like, where am I tensing up? Even when I was tensing up, I could feel my fists starting to happen, right? And like, how do I start to like just bring in some ease into my shoulder? How can I drop the breathing from my chest down into my belly? How can I, think I don't want to be judged on the thing I did on my worst day? Like that's not all of who I am. And so, thinking about back to that, car driving situation, right? I'm encountering this person in this one moment in time, right? And maybe they cut me off, and that's not all their story. And how do I wish them well on their travels? Because the reality is that me holding on to the agitation hurts me. Right. This person is going on with their life, but I'm holding on to that energy. And so how do I let that go? Right. And then that translated into dynamics at work. And, as I became an anti-racism consultant in the last several years, how did that translate into embodying that in these really sometimes polarized conversations where someone like fundamentally believes something so different from you? And how do you wish them well? And it's so radical, because I remember doing a blog post a couple of years ago, and I think it was called I Wish You Well, Even If You Don't Wish Me Well. And but the image was All Lives Don't Matter Until Black Lives Matter. And I could tell I got the most comments ever on that blog post. And it was often people not in support. And the way I would respond to each comment was, I wish you well. Right? Because it was this idea of like, I remember my spouse was like, why don't you just ignore them? And I said, I can't, because those comments, like, I can feel it in my bones. I can feel it in my body. And I don't want to armor myself up more. I really want to let them go. And I think there must be some pain that drives them to write these comments. And so I wish them well on the journey, because I hope that they find some peace. I hope that they have some sort of transformation that allows them to put a different kind of energy out into the world. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I just noticed too, there's a link to the blog post that you were just referring to in the chat for anyone that's interested in reading. I'm hearing and absorbing just your words, and the word liberation comes to mind, because just the act of not doing harm to yourself is just beautiful, and I can see how that ripples, and I can see how that might be, and accessibility, that comes to mind too, the access in that space between the action and then the kindness, the practice of that, giving a window for access to even think about letting it go. That spaciousness that's there. That's really profound, and it is radical. And I can't imagine it's easy to do. And yet these practices from time, a lot of my teachers have said before, they're simple and not easy.
Yeah. And
so that's resonating quite a bit.
That's what makes it a practice, right? Is that it's imperfect, and some days, some moments it's easier than others.
Right. Exactly.
It makes me think of this funny story of my now 14-year-old. He might have been like last year or something. He's he likes to create videos for YouTube and Twitch and other kinds of things. And so sometimes he would get people hating on him, like comments or whatever, people who didn't like whatever he was putting out there. And I remember at first he used to react with such rage, right? And he, you know, he does some of my video editing for me, and he saw the ways that I was communicating to people who were, you know, writing kind of more hateful comments. And I remember it was so powerful to me that show, like, our kids are watching, right? Is that he said, you know, thanks, Mom, like seeing the way that you respond to the people who are saying really mean things, like it changed the way that I interact with my subscribers or the people watching my content, right? Is that I'm not reacting to them in the same way. And so I thought, oh, like that is everything to me, is like raising the next generation that can see, right? It's so easy behind these screens to write stuff, but like there are humans behind those words and those actions. And so how to get a 13-year-old to take a moment to respond versus react.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to just how much what we say and do matters, because it's bigger than us. And just thinking about, you know, the young folks, the younger generations, as part of motivation to act with no harm. That's really compelling and moving. Certainly a nice thing for me to remember if I need to feel motivated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. And in my mind, I think we have to start so young. I can have a similar story about my daughter, who's 12 now. And I remember when she was in 4th grade, there's something that happens in 4th grade where like mean girl stuff emerges. And I remember she was having this really hard time with this other girl. And like, I just kept reiterating to her about, you don't have to like her, but you don't have to cause harm, right? Like you don't have to be friends with her, but your friends might be friends with her, and like how to like embody and practice over and over and over again. Have your feelings, and let's not bully, let's not cause harm. Right? That there has to be something going on with this other person that makes them act that way. You may not want them in your life, and you don't have to cause harm.
Yeah, two things are coming to mind in what you're sharing. One, just circling back a little bit, just to name that I'm really appreciating that you're mentioning, as I'm understanding it, just meeting the mind and the body as it is in the moment. So even if in those micro moments, if you're driving, just, you know, it doesn't have to be some, you know, perfect long practice. It can look and feel so many different ways. And I just wanted to highlight that, because for folks that are like me, that sometimes feel like, oh, it needs to be, you know, my pattern of perfectionism that comes up, that's really harmful, not only to myself, but other folks. So I wanted to bring that in. And then what you're sharing here too kind of makes me think of forgiveness, which I know it's another element, but it's I have mixed feelings about it, if I'm honest. You know, just forgiving, and even from an outside perspective looking in, I could say, well, why do you have to forgive this if it's not forgiveness? But you know, I can understand wanting to offer compassion because it's an act of love for yourself. Is that something similar to forgiveness as well?
Yeah, I think forgiveness is so complicated. Often when I think of forgiveness, I think about two different kinds of forgiveness. The forgiveness of like I'm purposely, intentionally like forgiving someone for something they've done to me. And the other version of forgiveness is, to me, that's external. The other one, I think, that's more important in some ways is the internal, right? It's this act of non-attachment or letting go of how much energy or impact this is having on me, right? Because some people do not do things to encourage us to forgive them. And some people can never do enough to make up for, or to make an amends for what they've done. And it's interesting when I think about forgiveness, it like starts to catapult me into all these different realms. And I think about so much of the anti-racism work that I do is really about collective liberation, right? That if we focus our efforts on those who are the most vulnerable or who have been historically the most oppressed, then we can start to see the ripple effect of that, right? And this idea of in abolitionism, we talk about a world in which everyone has the resources that they need. Everyone feels like their lives matter, and that we reimagine a society in which, as a collective, we care about each other, right? That there's goodwill, and when harm happens, we don't cancel each other, we don't incarcerate each other, we don't kill each other, that there isn't this violence. Instead, it is you did harm. I believe in your capacity to learn, to do better, and to make an amends. And I'm going to hold you accountable to that, while also being compassionate. And for me, like that, I think about those micro moments, and I don't think I could do those micro moments without a regular practice, right? Because I think that regular practice of sitting with myself every day and cultivating that metta within myself, right? Like, can I have goodwill towards the body I'm in, even if this is a larger size body than I was a couple years ago, right? And can I cultivate that goodwill or friendliness towards sensations or discomfort or emotions that don't bring me joy, right? Like thinking about like those moments of being with yourself, that friendliness towards the stories I tell myself and where I go in the stillness, right? Like that metta towards yourself, right? That if you can love yourself, all parts of you, then it's easier to bring that forward to other people.
Yeah, that really rings true, because for myself, if I could just, if I want to be kind to someone that I'm having difficulty with, if I'm not having access of that sort of care, that relationship with myself, I'd be making it up. It's just like, so that, self-care is really community care. And just what you're saying about collective transformation and liberation. And I also really love the piece about holding one or those in a group accountable. And I feel like I'm really appreciating your work and what you do, because it feels like your offerings, at least for me, and I've only been to one of your workshops presently, but just holding space for someone to come in and practice what is it like to be in community? What does that feel like? Because that action piece of accountability is so important. I don't want to be using, and maybe we could talk about this more in depth, but just how is it possible to use the metta practices harmfully as a way to ignore or avoid? How can we be watchful of that? And then how can we bring our practices to community? Because if we're just doing it on our own, we're just doing it on our own.
Yeah. It makes me think of spiritual bypassing, and how sometimes we can use these practices, like conceptual practices, as a way to invalidate or suppress or have power over people in a way that doesn't create space for the messiness, right? And so when I think about, I have to first be in the messiness in order to heal, in order to move through it. If I keep bypassing it, then it stays there at festering, right? And it's gonna be triggered or activated in other times, or it's gonna be harder to really embody these things. And I think sometimes we're saying things, but our bodies aren't connected to what we're saying, right? It's not in our spirit. It's not. And so, like, I can think about my daughter has this habit of saying sorry, like it's an automatic response, right? It's not, I know the difference of her embodied apology versus automatic. I did something, oof, I feel embarrassed or ashamed. Let me say sorry. Like it's so quick, but it doesn't, with that sorry, there isn't the, how am I going to make it right? Right. And I think like real accountability is how do I make it right? Right. That if we move away from perfection, we're each going to do harm. And so how do we have grace with ourselves? How do we have grace with other people? And the bypassing it, right, is I don't want to sit in the discomfort that you have to be in for a period of time. And so I think that we do, as humans, as a collective, we do too much of that, bypassing the discomfort, the sadness. I mean, the past couple of years, there's been so much grief and so much rage and so much trauma, right? And as the restrictions are lifted, all that stuff is still living in our bodies. Right. And in some ways, we've become less social beings because we've been more isolated. So we have to build back these muscles, right? And I think about how do we allow people to have their feelings, to really be seen and to be heard, and to practice goodwill towards each other, even if we don't agree.
Yeah. Yeah. And just appreciating that your work really, I think, fuels what you're saying. It embodies these thoughts and these words that are being shared. Because I do feel like it's a practice, just like mindfulness or metta, to be in community. And I think there's even a way to set an intention to be in community and see what happens from there. And luckily there are spaces like yours that you offer to try it out. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, because there's the metta you do by yourself, and then you go out in the world and you're triggered by other people, right? And then the practice really begins, right? Because then it's like, well, how do I apply? How do that thing that I do on my couch in the mornings, how does that apply in this situation? I can remember many times where I'm asking myself, what is going on with me that it's really hard to have friendliness or goodwill towards this person? Like what? Because for a long time, I remember, I would vent to my husband about what this person did, what this person did. And it was like, that was a practice for me to get to the point of, vent a little bit. And then go inside yourself and like, what are you disconnecting from? What are you avoiding? What's coming up within you that you have to spend some time with? Because it's not really about that other person.
Right.
I'm giving them a lot of power in this moment, but it's not really about them.
Yeah, balancing that internal and external. Yeah, very much a practice, indeed. What do you find challenging about the metta practice? Is there anything today that's challenging about it, or how has it changed over time since you began?
I think what I've noticed for myself in the last couple of years, mainly driven by the pandemic, but my life has changed in the pandemic. I think what's hard for me is I have created such a bubble for myself, right? And at this point, I'm a consultant. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I was at least still part-time working in a counseling center. And now I'm my own boss. I do consulting. So like I pick my clients and like it's a short-term relationship, and I still do some therapy, and like I work from home most of the time. So I feel in some ways getting myself out into the world more again is my next step, because I feel like I've created such a cocoon here that I think my nervous system probably isn't used to all of the stimulation of the world, like in a less controlled manner. And so I think for me, the challenge is as spring emerges, getting myself out there so my body can remember what it's like to be with other people, strangers, and like just being with a wide variety of people, right? So I do these anti-racism workshops, but for the most part, it's people who are opting in to having these conversations, right? I even try to limit how many trainings I do with people who, where they have to be mandated to come to the workshops, right? So like even, I think, so I think the muscle is there, and I think I need to be out in the world more, being triggered by people in order to deepen the practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Taking that inspired action is how I'm hearing you. And for those moments, though, when maybe there's a natural response to freeze, just because there's so much cruelty nationally here in the US, but also across the globe. We're in war, and that doesn't seem to stop. So I'm having a lot of conversations with folks where they're just like, I have to turn away. And so in essence, there's some avoidance happening there, maybe for good reason. And how do we stay watchful of not just, staying in the frozen or the guilt, because that's not really serving, me or anyone else.
Yeah.
Are there the word tips come to mind, but it's like, ugh. Because this is not a tips thing, right? It's and yet I guess it comes back to that how, and that's going to feel and look different for everyone. But for yourself, I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me it's multi-layered. I think it's okay to have tips, right? I think about one. I think about like what reduces my vulnerability to being what I call an emotion mind, right, or in lizard brain, right? So like getting the right amount of sleep that my body needs, right? Eating the foods that nourish me. If possible, working the hours that are conducive for me, not too much, like the right amount of stimulation, like exercising, playing, being in relationships with people, having time for meditation or yoga or some kind of contemplative practice that allows you time to be inside with yourself or be in stillness. And so when I think about like those are things we can do in our daily life that help us reduce vulnerability, right? If we do more of that in our daily life, then it's easier to access goodwill and friendliness. It's easier to practice loving kindness. I just think about when I'm sleep deprived, when I am hungry or hangry, right? Like when I am, been too isolated, or as an introvert, been too much in social situations, like that reduces my capacity, right? And so, for me, it was like figuring out like how many therapy clients can I have in a day, and how many in a row, right? How many workshops, right? And how much social time, how much alone time, right? And then when I think about then from there, right, like I make sure that I have this daily meditation practice. It's one of the first things I do every morning, and it changes a little bit, but and for me, it's short practices, like 10 minutes a day for me. And sometimes I need restorative yoga because I can feel it in my body, the exhaustion, the toll. I've really learned to be in my body and notice how it tells me when there's too much going on, and it needs to have more time to rest, and really embracing rest more as like countercultural in some ways. And that's my form of resistance in some ways. And then I think about then from there, right? So I've cultivated these ingredients in my daily life. And then how can I move around in the world just embodying this kind of friendliness? I used to run these workshops called Befriending Your Emotions, Like, how do I become friends with my emotions? There's no bad emotions, right? Like, they all serve a purpose, right? And they're all wise. And if I tend to my emotions, then it's easier to support these practices of being with other people. And every moment is an opportunity to practice, like every moment. I can't do the big moments without all the little moments. And I can't pick and choose who I'm going to cultivate friendliness with. Like, this person is deserving, this person isn't deserving. No.
Right. And what you're saying reminds me of just setting up the causes and conditions for, in order to do no harm, in order to show up with love, in order to show up as a full self. And there's so much compassion in that. What are the differences or similarities between compassion and metta, actually?
Yeah, I don't think there's that much of a difference. I think I use them interchangeably, but I guess I feel like in some ways compassion feels more cognitive, and it's something I feel like I'm doing towards myself or towards other people. Versus metta, to me, feels more like the practice. Like, it feels like deeper to me. It feels more spiritual for me. And it could be because I feel like the self-compassion world, I appreciate so much of the ways in which they've been able to package themselves and to share it out into the community. But it feels more like follow these steps. And I think what I love about all the different ways that they're packaged in the world is that different things resonate with different people, right? So for some people, metta, that's going to be a turnoff, right? Especially if it has, Eastern philosophy kind of baked into it, and others, compassion, that makes sense. They can do the neuroscience of it, and they can talk about, rewiring their neural pathways. And so I think whatever people can find, the teachers, the practices that allow them to do it, I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm.
That resonates. Just referring to some questions here. I know there's some coming in too, and I do want to set aside time for you to guide a practice. Maybe that might be a good moment just now. We've been talking a lot about and sharing a lot about metta and compassion now too, but yeah, maybe we can, be present for a practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So I invite you to take a shape that you can be in for a few minutes. And I always think about doing that with intention, right? That shape is the beginning of the metta, right? To not take a shape that you're just like, oh, this is the shape I should take, versus like, this is what's going to be most supportive of me right now, whether that is rest or alertness or awareness or just being as you are. And then having a soft gaze or closing the eyes. And inviting you to even bring a little bit of movement into your body, just to loosen or invite in more ease, or do some stretching, some shoulder or neck rolls or wrist rolls. And thinking about just bringing in attitude of ease, an attitude of love or friendliness. And allowing your senses to draw you into the space. Maybe noticing your feet, connecting with the earth. An awareness of the sounds around you. The air touching your skin. smell, taste in your mouth. Feeling the rhythm of your heartbeat and the rhythm of your breath. I invite you to bring and invite in all parts of yourself. The parts you adore, and the parts you struggle with. Parts that tend to be visible, and the parts that tend to be invisible. Welcoming your child parts, your emotional parts, the rebel within you, and all the wisdom you bring into the space. And I want you to just allow the words I'm about to say to you to land as they land. I'm going to offer this kindness to you. May you be safe from inner and outer harm. May you be happy and content. May you be healthy and strong. May you live with ease and well-being. May whatever blocks your heart be dissolved. May you know joy and freedom. May you have food, shelter, and good care. May you be free from animosity and hatred. May you know peace. May you be a good friend to yourself. And just an awareness of which words you were able to take in and which words were harder. Maybe taking a moment to bring to your mind's eye a loved one. And we'll take a few moments to wish them well. May this loved one be safe from inner and outer harm. May they be happy and content. May they be healthy and strong. May they live with ease and well-being. May whatever blocks their heart be dissolved. May they know joy and freedom. May they have food, shelter, and good care. May they be free from animosity and hatred. May they know peace. May they be a good friend to themselves. Letting that person be well on their journey. I invite you to bring to mind maybe someone you know or someone from afar that you struggle with. Maybe that has caused you harm or others harm. Bringing them up into your mind's eye, noticing how your body and mind are reacting to just the acknowledgement of this person who's caused harm or who can be difficult to be in relationship with. And seeing if we can bring some of this metta in their direction. May they be safe from inner and outer harm. May they be happy and content. May they be healthy and strong. May they live with ease and well-being. May whatever blocks their heart be dissolved. May they know joy and freedom. May they be free from animosity and hatred. May they have food, shelter, and good care. May they know peace. May they be a good friend to themselves and others. Letting go of that image, acknowledging it was what it was, coming back to yourself, seeing yourself as part of a larger community, a larger collective. And let's wish the community and the collective well. May we all be safe from inner and outer harm. May we all be happy and content. May we all be healthy and strong. May we all live with ease and well-being. May whatever blocks our hearts be dissolved. May we all know joy and freedom. May we all have food, shelter, and good care. May we all be free from animosity and hatred. May we all know peace. May we all be good to each other. May we all have not only enough to survive, but enough to thrive. I invite you to take this energy of metta, of cultivating friendliness and kindness to not only yourself, but to all beings, without exception. May you go forth and move around in the world, sprinkling a little bit of kindness wherever you may travel.
Thank you so much, Nathalie,
Yeah, you're welcome.
for sharing your practice and that phrase that you used about may your heart, about unblocking the heart, whatever is blocking the heart to dissolve.
Yeah.
That's just really sitting there for me, especially when I'm practicing offering kindness to all beings without exception. Just, um, yeah, I think it spoke to the heart's capacity to be boundless. So that was
Mhm.
really beautiful. Thank you so much
Yeah,
for that meditation.
you're very welcome. Yeah, it makes
Yeah.
me think of, I love that you put your hands to your heart during the practice. And I think that those are some of the adaptations, right? Is that sometimes like a hand on the heart, hand on the belly, or both on the heart, like that just helps us, I think, ground a little bit more, or take a little bit of that more in for those of us who benefit from that addition as well. And I remember a couple of years ago, I started in my email signature. Um, what it says before my name at the end is, "May you sprinkle kindness wherever you go." And and it's so interesting that people who've been touched by that, like people who like randomly respond and say, "I so love that you say sprinkle kindness," or "Thank you so much," or "I will do that," right? And it's like
Mhm.
that little thing, which is just like a little thing at the end of my email. But I think those little things that we can bring forth in the world, I think we're like starving for it, starving
Mm.
for that kindness that just, I just had a flash of like what it must have been like in some parts of the world, and maybe still true at this time, of when life was simpler and life was slower, and the ways in which communities cared for each other.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah.
And so how do we do that in daily life again? And
Mhm.
and think broader of who our community is.
Mhm. Yeah, and those words at the end of your email certainly reached my heart. So, I think that what we're saying matters quite a bit. It's being felt as you're describing, and I really appreciate too just naming the adaptation of touch, or some it made me think of how sometimes when I feel frozen, or I don't have what I feel is the capacity or the access to have a boundless heart, I will even put my hand on the ground so as to say that if I can't take it right now,
Mhm,
the earth, as
mhm,
my witness, maybe
mhm,
can see or feel this. Um, and there's just, yeah, experimenting with that sense of touch and sensation has
mhm.
really been profound for me personally.
Yeah,
Thank you for bringing that in. Yeah, so I want to give space here because the hour kind of went by and we
yeah,
have just about 10 minutes. So I know there are comments and questions. If it's okay, maybe I can just kind of open that up to the community.
sure.
Um, yeah, I'm seeing Jyoti say that this description earlier in the conversation of internal and external forgiveness is really powerful. Deep gratitude for this. Um, yeah, there's a question about, can you describe what your daily practice looks like that enables you to be so compassionate?
Mm, yeah, I think I feel like I have different practices for different seasons of my life. So I would say probably the practice I come back to the most is just like 10 to 20 minutes, or some days just 5 minutes of, the chime rings. I like to set a timer. Chime rings, and I'm just with, at this point I don't have an anchor, but at some point I used to have like a my breath anchor or a sound or something, a chime. And I'm just with myself, however I show up in that moment. Other times, I like to have a reading, a short reading that I do at the beginning, just to kind of settle. And other times, I like chanting, or I personally do not want to chant, but I want to hear other people chanting. And so I will listen to that, various different, and often that is related to whatever it is I feel like I need at that point. So I can remember like when I was starting my own business, and I was like anxious and afraid of like, working for myself and like taking the leap. And I remember I was listening to this chant for like 40 days. And it was like every morning, and just that energy, that vibration which was really, in essence, cultivating friendliness towards this fear, right? It's like, I'm terrified of going on my own. It's like so much easier to work for somebody else in some ways, like this financial security. And it's like that fear, that anxiety, how do I become friends with it? How do I help calm my nervous system down in a way that my regular practices weren't enough? So I really encourage people to play. I remember a yoga teacher talked about taking the practices of like ancient practices, and how do you make them for people in daily life who aren't living in monasteries, who aren't, like more reclusive in some ways. And I thought, like, even making lunch for my kids, like, how do I see this as an offering? How do I, instead of a chore, how do I see it as like nourishing them, right? And that changed my relationship to making lunches, right? And so, like, how do we take the things that are the day-to-day grind, and how do we make them more spiritual in a lot of ways? That's how I think so much of the metta stuff, to me, it's spiritual. And that's been transformational.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Just, it's a beautiful reminder to look at what's happening in the day already, and how to make it more spiritual or more meaningful or thoughtful. Yeah, I really love that. Yeah, thank you so much for that share. See, and I'm just encouraging anyone else, if there's questions, to please drop them into the chat. Beautiful, the meditation you shared seemed like a prayer to me. Yeah, that's what you shared there.
Yeah, I think for me, when I think coming from a family that was religious and now being in a family that's more spiritual, or like we've cultivated more of a spiritual, is I think about how do we bring the sacred into everyday life, right? To me, like, metta is about the sacred, right? The sacred nature of every human being, right? That I believe people are born that way, and that they have that capacity within themselves. And so, like, how do we bring the sacred into just about everything we do, which is a way of really care. So even I think about like how we treat other animals or bugs or ants, right? Like, all of that is about like honoring, like, each being has a purpose in this life.
Yeah. And for me, that brings up, like, just taking this step by step and bringing it in again in those smaller moments. And oftentimes, I think even when the question of around what's happening in the Ukraine right now, a lot of folks are like, well, what does it matter if I do this small thing, or be it, something we're going through here in the US? And I think what you're sharing really speaks to the fact that it is the practice of doing what we can, and whatever we're able to do in that moment, and get that to be more into our day to day, so that at least for myself, I can speak for me. When I'm in the practice of that, I can notice gratitude more easily, and I could also notice when I'm doing harm, or when I see harm, in a more thoughtful, sort of discerning way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a colleague who would often talk about, like, asking herself this question of, in this moment, am I at peace or at war? And that stayed with me, because, like, I think we can tell when we're at peace or when we're at war, right? Like, I can tell, right? Like, the energy I'm putting into things, the tone of voice, how fast I'm walking, like, all of that. And so thinking about, we're talking about war in its literal sense, but what about all the other little wars that are happening day in and day out within ourselves and in our communities? And if we're all connected, how does my little bit of kindness have this ripple effect on other beings all around?
Absolutely, yeah. And in your meditation practice too, just, I noticed when my body repeatedly would go from tension into release, or release into tension, and just you know, how you're describing that these practices, it's really like about embodying and really bringing them into the fabric of our being and our day to day, as you're saying. And the body holds so many messages, you know, is for present in the body at the moment,
Hmm.
and how to meet that feels like such a, well, a lifelong practice.
Hmm. Yeah. And how do we meet it with friendliness, right? Because
Right.
sometimes we meet like what's happening within ourselves with shame or criticism or like beating ourselves up rather than with like curiosity, right? Like, why am I so sad? Why am I so
Mhm.
anxious? What's arising within me? How might my body be communicating to me that I need to rest more, that I need to slow down, that this job or this relationship isn't nourishing me or satisfying me? How do we like see the things that are difficult to be with as really our teachers?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think what you're saying about the friendliness is, it's it's crucial for me because I'm unable to get curious or even to start to investigate or interrogate harm or discomfort or guilt or any range of emotions, joy. If I if I if I have this sort of judgmental, non-friendly way of being, my mind
Mhm.
actually can't hold those harmful thoughts and emotions when I'm focused and concentrated on
Mhm.
friendliness. So that's an interesting thing that I've been kind of
Right.
like, well, why friendliness? Well, that's one way that it showed up
Hmm.
for me.
Yeah.
Um,
And
there's
that
another, oh,
friendliness,
sorry.
I think that friendliness, that cultivating that friendliness within me allows me to say really difficult things to people because
Yes.
it's from a place of intentionality and
Hmm.
embodiment and a settled body that is not meant to, the person may not like what I'm saying,
Right.
but I'm not trying to harm them. I'm not trying to have power over them. I'm not trying to diminish them in some way. It's coming from
Mm,
this place of like, here's my truth that's coming. I own it as my stuff, right?
mhm.
And I want to develop intimacy in our relationship, and so I'm going to share it with you.
Yes. Yes. Speaking to that profound sense of agency and access to choice. Yeah, there's an assertive quality in what I'm gathering, like just taking in your words, that and what a gift it is to be assertive and clear.
Right.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, I think that
it's
sometimes we think that these practices mean that we can't be assertive, that
right.
we have to be resigned in some way or passive in some way, when it actually might liberate you to be able to speak
Exactly.
your truth.
Yes. Hmm. Well, I'm just being mindful of time. We're about a minute away. There's lots of space in discovering boundaries, Mary's naming. And Janine says, thank you so much. I have to leave early. Beautiful share about how I can make meal making an offering of love. Thank you for this conversation. Before we close, I just want to leave space if there's anything that you want to share, anything upcoming where folks can practice with you, how they can reach you and stay in touch. Please, we'll put those links in the chat as well. But
Sure.
anything here that you want to share before we
Yeah.
call?
I mean, feel free to check out my website, drnatedmond.com, for any upcoming things. And because I'm so committed to anti-racism work and collective liberation, I'm launching a membership site that's really focused on that, where we'll have offerings of these kinds of practices and just how to show up differently for each other and work
Mhm.
towards collective liberation. So if that's something you're interested or know people who are interested in doing that, that it's really about taking these practices that are ancient and figuring out how to apply that in modern day
Thank you so much. And thank you again for choosing to spend your time and your energy
life.
and your heart with us today. Very much.
Mm.
Hope to see you and be with you
Yeah.
soon.
So good to be with all of
Thank you.
you. Take care.
Bye.